Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video is going to continue our examination into the city of San Francisco, the clandestine Baghdad by the Bay, military intelligence enveloped, infiltrated, overrun since Father Junipero Serra established a mission in San Francisco. And since I believe before the alleged discovery of gold in California on the American River by James Marshall in January 1848, San Francisco had the architecture and the apparatus for military control, and they had a Presidio Army base established at the same time that they established the Franciscan mission in San Francisco. Isn't that interesting that they establish an army fort simultaneously as the Father Junipero Serra mission is created? And then, of course, the Spanish and the Mexicans are booted out of here. And, these crazy folks from the East Coast came out to set up shop in California after the Mexican-American Wars, right? So the Bear Flag Revolt in Sonoma County that the U.S. Marines took care of. All right, I wanted to continue on to let you know when I use terms such as hotspot or high concentration zone, or I use a term like enclave, I want you to take those words seriously. I'm not into applied linguistics. I'm not here to lie to you. I'm not getting paid to lie to you. I'm not working at MIT and taking over Noam Chomsky's job. That's not what I'm doing. So when I use words, I'm trying to use their true meanings. I realize that words have multiple definitions, but I want to take that word enclave for an example because it applies to the here and now today when everyone is ordered to shelter in place. You know, if they're not watching steroid sports like steroid football, that would include college football. That would include NFL, not for long football. That would include Major League Baseball. That would include college baseball. That would include the NBA. Some people refer to that as the National Bastards Association because there's so many pregnant women in many of the cities that the NBA players visit. Be that as it may, that's what they used to call it when I had clients that were working in that entertainment show. It's an entertainment product. It's not a sport. It's entertainment, sports entertainment. Anyway, that's college basketball where the kids magically overnight grow tremendous muscle, and it's through the hormone programs and the amphetamines to get everybody ready to go, along with cocaine, morphine, corticosteroids, so that we play pain-free, right? Let me take this word enclave. So a couple definitions for enclave. You know, it applies to Holmby Hills, Bel Air, Benedict Canyon, where Sharon Tate was murdered but didn't live. This applies to the Malibu gated colony, where Johnny Carson lived, where John Frankenheimer lived, where Tom Hanks allegedly lives before he disappeared for the last 2.5 years. In the same home that John Frankenheimer lived, where the Last Supper for Robert Kennedy was held in the Malibu gated colony, where Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate were dinner guests at the Last Supper for Robert Kennedy before he had his head blown off at the Ambassador Hotel on Wilshire Boulevard in downtown Los Angeles on June 5th, 1968. I'm not making this stuff up. This is a kind of the ridiculousness we're dealing with. Enclaves apply to Atherton, Menlo Park, the residential areas around Sand Hill Road, where the private clandestine service bankers are located, on Sand Hill Road, across from Stanford University campus. And there's enclaves in there. Enclaves in my world have no sidewalks and tall hedgerows. There's a few exceptions to that, but generally it's a no sidewalk policy in order for you to have an enclave. But according to the definitions by Webster, it is known as a noun, and it's a portion or territory within or surrounded by a larger territory whose inhabitants are culturally or ethnically distinct. And they give an example in a sentence. They gave the troops a week to leave their coastal enclave. No, I don't think that's the best example. But anyway, second definition is a place or a group that is different in character from those surrounding it. For example, the engineering department is traditionally a male enclave. So that's another use of the word enclave. I'm going to use a third use of the word enclave because I think the implication that I received when I first heard the word enclave was that it would be an upscale, expensive, affluent area where really intelligent, smart people lived, and the no sidewalk policies was a way to keep riffraff and dog walkers away from the rich people because they coveted their privacy. They valued and cherished their privacy, and they coveted their privacy by eliminating city policies regarding sidewalks. So they paid income taxes or property taxes into the counties and cities where they lived, but they didn't want any sidewalks. All right, so that's one way of thinking, that it's for privacy for the residents. Another way to look at it is when you study Benedict Canyon and Laurel Canyon and Hollywood and Malibu Gated Colony and Holmby Hills, where the Hugh Hefner Playboy Mansion was located, and Walt Disney built a 35,000 square foot home on North Carrollwood Drive. I believe the address was 354 North Carrollwood Drive, just below the murder house where Sharon, Tate, and Abigail Folger were killed, approximately 1,000 meters from that, down the hill. And an alternative view of this would be, consider it a gilded cage. A gilded cage where you take a prisoner and you take their windowless concrete cell and then you remodel it and you redecorate it. You bring in a decorator and you hang expensive artwork and expensive vases and teak furniture, and maybe put down some Persian area rugs, right? And then you're in a gilded prison cell. Because if you study Benedict Canyon, Malibu Gated Colony, Hidden Hills, where the voice of the Los Angeles Dodgers just sold his home, Vince Scully, and Rebecca Grossman, who just murdered 2 little boys in a crosswalk, where she lives with her husband, Peter Grossman, who allegedly took care of Anne Heche before she unfortunately died, across the street from Peter Grossman's plastic surgery office, where he performs outpatient plastic surgery, which is his primary business, not a burn unit. The burn unit is technically part of an acute care hospital across the street from Peter Grossman's plastic surgery center. But they want you to believe that Peter Grossman is 100%, 24/7 involved with severe burns in an area that seldom, if ever, has a burn victim enter any hospitals in the Canoga Park porn center of the world. There are very few burn accidents in the porn area, except maybe sunburns. All right, so there's a lot of bear skin over there in Calabasas, Hidden Hills, Canoga Park, Chatworth, the Spawn Ranch area, Santa Susana Pass, Malibu Canyon. All right, anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that a gilded cage is still a prison cell, all right? And you can see that if you study Art Linkletter, if you study Walt Disney, if you study Roy Disney, who lived in Toluca Lake, which is a gated golf course community where Bob Hope lived, Bob Hope. And you study where William Shatner lives in Studio City on Berry Drive with no sidewalks. Or you study where Natalie Wood used to live with Robert Wagner sleeping overnight when she was 18 years old. It's 7708 Woodrow Wilson Drive, no sidewalks. Woodrow Wilson Drive off Woodrow Wilson Drive. So it's going to be kind of tricky for you to find that, because it's technically not on Woodrow Wilson Drive, even though the address reads Woodrow Wilson Drive. It's the same deception they used for the Sharon Tate murder scene. They used to call it 10050 Cielo Drive off Cielo Drive, but it's on Bella Drive, above Sunbrook Drive, which is off Angelo Drive. If you really wanted to find out where Abigail Folger got bayoneted 28 times to death, just go to the Walt Disney Mansion at 354 North Carrollwood Road and then Google map it from Walt Disney's mansion and just turn left on Angelo Drive, follow that up to Sunbrook Drive, turn right, and park. I mean, just go 100 feet and park your car. Then look straight up the ice plant and you'll see where Abigail Folger was murdered. If you look to your right, you'll see 10106 Sunbrook Drive, which is a cul-de-sac. It's not a drive, but they call it a drive. And that's where Timothy Leary lived. And that is where Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon went over to pay tribute to Timothy Leary in 1996 before that CIA West Point cadet died. Because Tim Robbins is a completely owned tool of CIA Hollywood. He's a social engineering pimped out tool, as is Oliver Silverstein Stone. He's a pimped out tool for Hollywood also. Oliver Stone, The Doors, JFK, Platoon, Born on the 4th of July, Oliver Stone. You know, what have I forgotten? The Heroin Mule out of Turkey, what was that called? Midnight Express. That was an Oliver Stone participation film. But all of his films are produced and approved by the CIA and Warner Brothers or MGM, Sony, or, you know, TriStar, which is Sony, which is Amazon. Amazon owns Sony. Sony owns TriStar. They own MGM, or as Dean Martin used to call it, Megam. They own the Mandalay Bay Hotel in Las Vegas, where the Stephen Paddock fake incident that never happened, the shooting from the room at the Mandalay Bay, that's owned by Amazon. Amazon owns Sony. Sony owns MGM. MGM owns the Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, where the shooting was allegedly, the shooter was, but I'm here to tell you it's probably a helicopter attack out of Nellis Air Force Base 10 miles up the road, up Las Vegas Boulevard. Anyway, what I wanted to say about Enclave is that there's always two ways to look at everything. For every attack, there's a counterattack. For every movement, there's a counter movement. And that's the whole point of the Haight Ashbury Project for CIA. It was established officially in 1965, even though the CIA was already very active in San Francisco since its inception. I mean, I'm telling you, since 1848, since the gold rush, before the gold rush, they were already military intelligent controlled. So when I say that that the CIA was operating the Haight Ashbury Project in 1965, that doesn't mean it's their first rodeo. They've been there for, you know, OSS and Army intelligence at the Presidio long before, you know, Timothy Leary rolled into town with Hunter S. Thompson and Ken Kesey and Bill Graham, Wulf Grajonca from New York, and Sharon Tate's father, Colonel Paul Tate, set up his shop there at the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic and lived in officer housing in the Presidio right next door to where Nancy and Paul Pelosi eventually moved into in 1969. Paul Tate had already been there for 4 years by the time Paul Pelosi returned to San Francisco. Nancy Pelosi was from Baltimore, Maryland, and was having children in New York when Paul Pelosi was getting a master's degree in finance, an MBA from New York University, NYU. And then after that, miraculously, Paul Pelosi moved to San Francisco just in time to make sure that there was no problems with Abigail Folger's mother, Ines Mejia, who lived on Broadway in Pacific Heights, which is a mile away. It's close. And because obviously she's traumatized when she finds out that her Harvard alumnus daughter, Abigail, is bayoneted 28 times to death in Benedict Canyon in an enclave controlled area. So perhaps she wasn't as motivated to conduct her Haight Ashbury Project or amphetamines research project or her Operation Midnight Climax or her Operation Sea Spray or her Operation Paul Tate counter anti-war movement operations, Wulf Grajonca free concerts, Hunter S. Thompson, you know, memorializing the Hells Angels and Sonny Barger and the trafficking of clandestine service drugs. Perhaps Abigail Folger's mother wanted to retire at age 62 since her daughter was murdered after Abigail would never have been in the private banking business were it not for her mother, Ines Mejia. She's the one that got her killed. Ines Mejia got her daughter killed. Her daughter wanted to quit. Her daughter was seeing a psychologist 5 days a week and 6 hours a week of therapy, where those meetings, those sessions were all recorded, and the clandestine services heard every word that Abigail Folger uttered to Marvin Flicker, Dr. Marvin Flicker of Beverly Hills, California. And I believe that got her killed because she was quitting, and she was supposed to get on a United Airlines plane flight Saturday morning at 10 a.m. to fly to San Francisco to inform her mother she was quitting, because her mother is #1 most important clandestine service finance officer in Haight Ashbury in 1969, which is when that went down. But what I wanted to make sure you understand when we talk about enclaves, you're talking about a surveillance canyon. And I believe that my supposition is that Art Linklatter's house, which was at 1100 Bel Air Road, or Brian Wilson's home, which is located on Bellagio Drive, which is at the bottom of Bel Air Road, or the Patty Duke home, where Patty Duke was never really present. That's at 1600 Summit Ridge Drive, which is just across from the murder scene of the Cielo murders. And I believe those homes, and perhaps the Doris Duke home, which is located on Bella Drive, across Cielo Drive from the murder scene, and other homes that I'm not mentioning, had surveillance infrared camera telescopes and could record and zoom in to the comings and goings on the properties all throughout the canyon for homes that the military considers performance staging areas. As William Shakespeare said, all the world is a stage and the humans are just players upon that stage. Well, I believe that the private bankers and the clandestine services choose in advance certain homes or certain enclave properties that will be used for parties, for porn, for scandalous activities, or for murder. And that those homes are surveilled 24/7. And now that we live in a 5G smart grid mesh with Amazon Ring cameras and Amazon sidewalks with transponders atop the light stanchions in every neighborhood in all urban areas, and many urban areas, many rural areas as well. What I'm saying is direct energy weaponry will be integrated and linked with the surveillance cameras. So you will have GPS targeting, you will have visual, audio surveillance, and if there's something out of compliance on one of these selected stage properties, they don't need an M7 bayonet to put you down. They can zap you with radio frequency direct energy particle beams, which I believe, my belief is that is what took down the 3 towers in World Trade Center, was that's a major component of how those buildings were liquefied, not burned up, not exploded up, but zapped and vaporized. Because you're talking about concrete, steel, sheetrock, you're talking about the plastic photocopy machines, the carpets, the desks, the cubicles were all turned into dust, along with, of course, the asbestos, because all those buildings were filled up with asbestos from Libby, Montana, that was sold through the W.R. Grace Company, which had a mining facility atop a mountain, which I personally rode my bike past. I wish I had known it was there. There's a book that I purchased at the bottom of that hill at the CVS pharmacy in the town of Libby, where about 1/3 of the population of Libby died of pneumonia through asbestos matriculite poisoning, which I'm sure people in Manhattan died of too, or all of the rescue dogs died of acute pneumonia from the asbestos, because it gets in your lungs and then your lungs naturally fill up with fluid as a reaction to the toxic waste that's in the lung tissues, and that's what kills you. It reduces your capacity of your lungs by putting this toxic stuff in there. That's why I'm so concerned about the chemtrails dumping over my head on a daily basis now. That's been going on since Thanksgiving 2022, and previously was going on weekly or bi-weekly, or probably every 3 or 4 days I look up and there's aluminum chemtrails or whatever else they're putting in that. I'm concerned because I don't want that in my lungs, because I know that I'll get a reaction of fluid retention. That's why I don't want to take in asbestos or aluminum or any product. Anyway, what I'm telling you is these enclaves do involve surveillance, and they do involve compliance. In other words, you get provisional housing if you mind your manners, and they'll boot you out of there or disappear you. All right, with respect to Haight Ashbury, I'm going to go off on a little directory of the people who lived in Haight Ashbury for a short time during the Summer of Love, 1967. So it's a little walk through memory lane here. I'm going to tie it back to Benedict Canyon, by the way. You won't believe how I'm going to do it, but everything that's connected here. I mean, Charlie Manson, that's not his real name. His name is Charles Maddox, Charles Miles Maddox, and the media called him Manson. And there was no Jonestown in British Columbia. It was actually called the People's Temple Agricultural Project. Just like you have the Haight Ashbury Project, they had the People's Temple Agricultural Project. That's what it was called. That's what the sign read over the front gate. It did not read Jim Jones. It didn't read Jonestown. It read People's Temple Agricultural Project. And of course, our Mockingbird fake media jumped on that and deleted that and called it Jonestown, because they wanted to demonize Jim Jones as a cult leader, in the exact way they did with Charlie Miles Maddox, who they renamed Manson, to go with Columbia Broadcasting System's pornography division, which was called Manson International. That was in the early 1950s. So before Charlie Manson, we had CBS's pornography adventure known as Manson International, which later became Carolco Pictures, owned by two friends of Oliver Stone, whose real names are Andres Weidman, who likes to go by Andrew. What does he go by? He goes by Andrew. Gee, I forgot that. I forgot his real name is Andres Weidman. And his fake name, I forgot. So his CIA name is Andrew something. And then you got Mario Casar. Those two. They had a $15 million life insurance paid to them on Jose Menendez's life. $15 million bucks. There was, the Suns killed him. No, they had a $400,000 policy that they'd have to split 50-50, right? So they had $200,000 on their father. I think $15 million is a bigger number than $400,000. That's what I think. All right, so let me go down memory lane here. So you remember we had the Vietnam War, which was kicked off essentially in the Bay of Tonkin incident, which involved Jim Morrison's father, Rear Admiral George Morrison, who was the youngest Rear Admiral of the United States Navy in his early 40s, when he confirmed the Bay of Tonkin fake incident that never happened, where some plywood boats attacked the USS Maddox in the Bay of Tonkin, like that would really happen in real life. It wouldn't. Anyway, so what I wanted to tell you is that the next year, of course, they started to impose the mandatory draft and ramp up the Vietnam War based on a false flag incident known as the Bay of Tonkin. Now, simultaneously to that, since the CIA knows that people don't like to be drafted when they're college age and or they graduate and don't have a job, that's who you normally take: minorities, unemployed kids that are out of high school, and kids not attending university anymore because they graduated. You got to report to your draft board for your mandatory draft policy where you may be selected based on a lottery system. So they set up the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic unofficially in 1965. And as we moved the next couple of years, we of course had People's Temple, owned by the Regents of University of California, Berkeley. And in 1967, we moved Charlie Manson, not his real name, over there. That's the area where Patricia Hearst also had an apartment years later. But anyway, Charlie Manson and Mary Bruner were put together in an apartment near People's Park, off Dwight Way, off College Avenue, in 1967, just in time for the peace riots in Berkeley. That's when Charlie Manson was introduced to this story. He was not a cult leader. He was auto theft, allegedly, which I don't even think he's guilty of the auto theft. And he served like 7 years for auto theft, which makes no sense at all. One car. It's not grand theft. It's one vehicle. He didn't steal a fleet of cars. We should know that in 1967, the record contract companies like Warner Brothers and Columbia Records and all their minions like Reprise and all these little brokerage companies that all have to go through CBS or RCA Victor or Warner Brothers to get their music played on the radio. I'm here to tell you that Graham Nash moved into Haight Ashbury. He moved into 731 Buena Vista West. He also moved in with his roommate was Bobby McFerrin. Okay? Then who else moved in there? Well, we had the Grateful Dead. You probably heard of them, right? Jerry Garcia. And there was that was at 710 Ashbury Street, was dubbed the Grateful Dead House because they smoked weed over there. I don't want to get into that. And then we had 32 Del Mar Street, Sid Vicious, the Sex Pistols moved in there just after Patty Hearst lived in that neighborhood also. But that's in 1978. So let me get back to 1967. 2400 Fulton Street, Grace Slick and her new band Jefferson Airplane, because in 1965 her band was called it was called, with her husband, Grace Slick's husband was the drummer, and it was called the New Republic or something. What was it called? The Great Society. The Great Society was Grace Slick's first band with her husband, who was the drummer. After she separated from him and fell into the arms of one of the players in the Jefferson Airplane, they created this new band. And Grace Slick was given provisional housing at 2400 Fulton Street. I'm here to tell you that none of these people paid any rent for these homes. These homes are consigned to them. These homes belong to the clandestine services and the record companies who these bands are signed with. And they follow orders or else they don't get their royalty check. Janis Joplin, we all remember Janis Joplin. She lived at 122 Lyon Street. She even got a California driver's license with that address on it. Janis Lynn Joplin, 122 Lyon Street, apartment number 3. Janis Joplin stood 5'5" and weighed 135 pounds in 1967. August 3rd, 1967. Then we have Jimi Hendrix. He moved into Haight Ashbury at 1524A Haight Street. Charlie Manson was given some housing if he wanted it at 636 Cole Street. I'm here to tell you he wouldn't have spent much time there. He's mainly in Berkeley, and or he's with Jim Jones up in Philo and Ukiah and the Greenfield Ranch during 1967. So I believe that 636 Cole Street, which is 2 blocks from where the Process Church was established in 1968, after Charlie Manson left town, left San Francisco for good to go down to Pacific Palisades, where he got a 6-acre estate, the Will Rogers CBS estate. So Charlie Manson never came back to San Francisco anymore. And so 636 Cole Street was, I'm sure, assigned to whoever. And I'm sure that whoever was living there, like Susan Atkins and some other people, it's just like a community house. And anyway, so then we have Big Brother and the Holding Company. That's Janis Joplin's band, orchestra, and they're at 1090 Page Street. Then we have the Hells Angels with Sonny Barger. I told you that he's working with Hunter S. Thompson. He's also working closely with Louis Jolyon West and Timothy Leary, and he's working with David Smith in the trafficking of illegal drugs, some legal and some illegal, because LSD was legal. LSD was legal in 1967, and Sonny Barger was given the address of 715 Ashbury Street, along with whatever sergeants and lieutenants that he had. I personally knew Sonny Barger, and I rode motorcycles with him once, and I had some heart-to-heart talks with him in the 1970s, and I found him to be a complete gentleman, and he told me in no uncertain terms, don't believe what you read in the newspapers. That's a quote from Sonny Barger. I've never forgotten that quote, and you know what? It's proven to be 100% correct. Hunter S. Thompson, he supposedly was an infamous doorman at the O'Farrell Nude Dancing Club off O'Farrell Street near the Castro where the gay section is. They had some nude dancing there, and that's to kind of build his street cred of 28-year-old Hunter S. Thompson, gonzo journalist for CIA. All right. Anyway, I think you get the picture, is that there is zero possibility that all these people who had record contracts with Columbia Records or Warner Brothers or RCA Victor could possibly all just decide that they all wanted to live in Haight Ashbury zip code in 1967. In other words, their agents, managers, studio executives told them that's where you're going to hang out for, I don't know, a couple months. And you're going to help out Bill Graham with the free concerts. And we're going to fly the Rolling Stones in here to do the free concert at Altamont, at the end of 1969. That comes, a couple years later, right? Because George Harrison also spent time in Haight Ashbury. Yoko Ono and John Lennon did too. They also performed at the Fillmore Auditorium, which is at Geary Boulevard next to the Scottish Rites Temple, which is the People's Temple Tabernacle. And there's Yoko Ono and John Lennon in 1969 performing in San Francisco. That's approximately 1 mile from Haight Ashbury proper. 1 mile. It's walking distance. You should also know that the show Full House, which featured Bob Saget, who was murdered last year about this time a year ago in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Orlando, Florida. Bob Saget, who supposedly was a comedian, although I never thought he was funny. He was the star of the television show Full House. And Lori Loughlin was his co-star. She lives in Hidden Hills, and she was neighbors with Rebecca Grossman in Hidden Hills, along with where Jose Menendez was building a home but never moved in because he got murdered in Beverly Hills at 722 North Elm Drive, where Elton John and Michael Jackson had lived previous to Jose Canseco being murdered. And what I should tell you is that Full House was produced by a fellow by the name of Jeffrey Franklin. After they destroyed the murder crime scene at Cielo Drive, where Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger were killed, they built a 10,000 square foot zero lot line house with 5 swimming pools. And that's where Jeffrey Franklin lives. He lives on the murder scene for Sharon Tate. And he's the producer of Full House, which had its star, Bob Saget, murdered in January 2022. And where Jose Menendez and his wife Kitty were murdered in Beverly Hills, 722 North Elm Street, Nightmare on Elm Street. It's actually Elm Drive. 722 North Elm Drive. I don't think there's any streets in Beverly Hills. There are no avenues in Benedict Canyon. So what I wanted to tell you is that after they cleaned up the mess of Jose and Kitty Menendez, 13 gunshot blasts to their bodies, the producer for the Columbo detective series, William Link, he moved in. So just like Jeffrey Franklin of Full House moved into the Sharon Tate murder scene, William Link moved into the Jose Menendez murder scene, both in Beverly Hills. And Lori Loughlin was, convicted of $500,000 of illegal bribes to get her 2 daughters into USC, where George Lucas went to film school, where Lino LaBianca graduated with a finance degree from USC. And he was murdered in his mother's home because he lived in the Disney mansion in Griffith Park. Because before Walt Disney moved into Benedict Canyon, Holmby Hills at 354 North Carrollwood Drive, he lived at 4053 Woking Way. That's what I said, Woking Way, 4053, below the Hollywood sign. Lino LaBianca and Rosemary LaBianca lived in that home for 7 years before they were killed at his mother's home, because they were transitioning to move down to San Diego, where they were in the process of buying a horse farm in Vista near the United States Camp Pendleton West Coast Training Facility. Yeah, about 10 miles to the east of that facility. You should know that down the hill from where Rosemary and Lino LaBianca were killed, about 8/10 of a mile down the hill and on the flats, is 4616 Greenwood Place. That's a 4-unit apartment house where Rosemary LaBianca's daughter, Susan, lived with her fiancé, Joe Dorgan. Joe Dorgan was a soldier in the Straight Satans and was partners with Danny DiCarlo, who's the treasurer of the Straight Satans, who did drug distribution for clandestine services out of Venice Beach through the greater Los Angeles area. They lived, Susan LaBarge, who went by Struthers, just to throw you off. She didn't go by LaBianca, and she didn't go by her baby daddy's name, who was LaBarge. She went by her step-baby daddy, who was not her baby daddy, Struthers, but was the baby daddy of her younger brother, Frank Struthers. And his name was Frank Sr., and you have Frank Jr., who's Susan LaBarge's younger brother. Does that all make sense? Anyway, the reason I bring that up is Benjamin Netanyahu refers to the Melrose Place home in speeches that he delivers regarding direct energy weaponry. And I just think that that's amazing to me, that of all the crazy Hollywood television sets that you could pick, you would pick the daughter of Rosemary LaBianca, who was bayoneted 41 times to death, where her daughter resided in number 4, unit number 4, at 4616 Greenwood Place. I find that extraordinary. I also find it extraordinary that Patricia Hearst was living with her so-called fiancé, Stephen Weed, right? And they were living at 2603 Benvenue Street, unit number 4, just like Susan LaBarge was unit number 4. Patty Hearst, Patricia Hearst, and Stephen Weed, who's 26 years old, and Patricia Hearst is 19 years old, and they're living right off College Avenue, 300 yards from People's Park, near Dwight Way and College Avenue. They're on Benvenue Street in unit number 4, and Stephen Weed is 7 years older. He was her teacher in elementary school at the Crystal Springs Upland Middle School in Hillsboro, which is the area that Congressman Leo Ryan represented, the 11th Congressional District of California, where Randolph Hearst had a 20-room mansion at 233 West Santa Ynez Avenue, 8 bedrooms, 7 bath, 9,856 square foot home, 20 rooms on a 1.25 acre lot in Hillsboro, near Hillsboro Heights. And his daughter, Patricia Hearst, attended the Crystal Springs Upland School, where she was taught by Stephen Weed, who was 20 and 21 years old, when she was 13 and 14 years old. Patricia Hearst met her fiancé when she was 13 or 14 years old at a private elite academy for college prep. Now, Patricia Hearst then transferred to Monterey to the Santa Catalina School, which brought us Abigail Folger years before. And Patricia Hearst was classmates with Lark Ota, same age as Lark Ota, who was the only member of the Ota family not murdered. In other words, Lark Ota's father, Dr. Victor Oder, was shot twice in the back of the head with a .38. Her mother was shot once in the back of the head with a .38. Her two younger brothers were both shot, I think by .22 caliber pistols in the back of the head. And then all four thrown into the swimming pool where they drowned if they hadn't already been bled out from the gunshot wounds to their head. Then Lark Ota's older sister, Tara, commits suicide, murdered with a garden hose after having ingested acute barbiturate toxic amounts of drugs with a garden hose attached to the tailpipe with her infant child in another room in the house. So if you think that's a suicide, that's like you think Susan Atkins murdered Sharon Tate when she had a 9-month-old baby boy and she's been doing babysitting the last year and a half. No way. Susan Atkins didn't kill anybody, and Tara Ota didn't kill herself either. All right. Anyway, I think it's extraordinary that when the story of the SLA, Symbionese Liberation Army, breaks into this apartment in Berkeley, in the same exact neighborhood that Charlie Manson and Mary Bruner were living, near the Newman Catholic Church. It's walking distance, really close. Then, of course, you have to believe the story that they beat up Stephen Weed and he just allowed his fiancée, age 19, to be thrown into a trunk of a car and driven away by some SLA soldiers, which might have involved Donald DeFreeze and others. Don't know if William or Emily Harris were present. Remember, they're from Indiana University, right? But anyway, don't know if they were present, but they're, of course, part of the Symbionese Liberation Army, right? You should also know that Donald DeFreeze was conveniently suicided, disappeared out of the story 102 days after this kidnapping on February 4th, 1974 happens. Donald DeFreeze has disappeared from the story, just like Tom Hanks, just like Anne Heche, just like Jeffrey Epstein. So you cannot interview Donald DeFreeze to see if my facts are correct and line up with his, because he's not available for comment. You should know that Patricia Hearst was moved to Haight Ashbury, and she resided into 1235 Masonic Street. Do you know how far that is from the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, CIA? It's 300 yards. She was moved 300 yards away from the CIA Free Medical Clinic in Haight Ashbury. That's where Patricia Hearst, after she was kidnapped, she was moved to the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, but at 1235 Masonic Street. So that's like 6 houses away. Then she was moved to 1827 Golden Gate Avenue. That's 1 mile from the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. I know that pretty good because I had a girlfriend that lived about 3 houses away from that address. Yeah, and she went to USF, Jesuit, University of San Francisco, and she lived on Golden Gate Avenue because it's very convenient. You can walk to campus, right? Then Patricia Hearst had 2 other residencies in San Francisco, one at 288 Presita, which is sort of over by the Mission Bay and near San Francisco General Hospital, where the Paul Pelosi fake hammer attack care was given, over where the Sandler Institute, Neurological Science Institute is. I'm here to tell you that the FBI couldn't find Patricia Hearst, and she was missing. She was missing for 19 months. She went missing, and they couldn't. The CIA, FBI could not find Patricia Hearst for 19 months. What a crack organization. And she's living walking distance from Diane Feinstein and Nancy Pelosi and Paul Pelosi. And Sharon Tate's father, I think he may have moved by then. But anyway, Nancy Pelosi, Paul Pelosi, Diane Feinstein, all are living in very close walking distance from where Patricia Hearst was living in at least 2 of these residences in the Haight Ashbury area near University of San Francisco and St. Ignatius de Loyola High School. And yet the FBI could not find her. I'll bet Nancy Pelosi could find Patricia Hearst. I'll bet Diane Feinstein could find Patricia Hearst. Probably ran into her at the grocery store, don't you think? You should also know that eventually Patricia Hearst was implicated in the bank robbery in the Sunset District of the Hibernian Savings and Loan, and she was represented by F. Lee Bailey, you know, who got O.J. Simpson acquitted. F. Lee Bailey? CIA lawyer. Well, he got Patricia Hearst convicted and sentenced to 35 years in prison for bank robbery of one bank. Patricia Hearst was also implicated in a bank robbery up near Sacramento and Citrus Heights. However, they didn't get her on surveillance camera, so it was never definitively proven that Patricia Hearst participated in the getaway car in Citrus Heights by Sacramento. But she was convicted of the bank robbery of the Hibernian Bank in the city of San Francisco, sentenced to 35 years. She served 22 months. Then Jimmy Carter was granted and commuted the sentence to time served, 22 months. Then in 2001, that was done in 19. Gee, I don't have the date on the. Yeah, I do. 1979 is when President Jimmy Carter commuted Patricia Hearst federal prison sentence to time served at 22 months. Then in 2001, good old Bill Clinton awarded and granted Patricia Hearst a full pardon. All right. So what I'm trying to tell you is I consider Haight Ashbury and the city of San Francisco and the city of Berkeley and the city of Emeryville and the city of South San Francisco, where Congressman Leo Ryan came from. Well, once he was indoctrinated into Jesuit CIA training, that's where he came from. Because remember, he came from Lincoln, Nebraska originally, and then about 6 or 7 other states, including Florida and New York and Illinois. So I don't know where Leo Ryan is really from, but the point is that he ended up dying at the People's Temple Agricultural Project at the airport, which the media has dubbed Jonestown. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Hit the like and subscribe. We'll talk soon.